So the Demon Souls iceberg was pretty popular considering the minuscule size of my channel, so it's finally time to do another one on a FromSoft title, this time Bloodborne. In case you didn't know, icebergs are filled with fun theories, facts, and trivia. The lower down we get, the more weird and obscure. Unlike last time, I didn't make this iceberg myself. This is a combination of two icebergs I found on Reddit, made by users Andresk99 and a deleted user. Both icebergs are linked in the description, and some entries I've either cut or mixed around because some of the things on there didn't really make a ton of sense. I don't know if they were made when, like, not everything sort we knew about the game was out, but yeah, I've put them all together. I've put both the entries together and cut some out and mix them in. So without further ado, let's get into it. Bridge, shortcut, and Yarnum. So this is either one of two things. One, just commenting on the looping level design and that there is numerous shortcuts to link from the first lantern around to the Cleric Beast and Gascoigne's bosses area. Or, more likely, is there was going to be an additional shortcut from behind the Cleric Beast lantern, presumably to the Cathedral Ward, which was cut for the final release of the game. The Hunter's Dream. The Hunter's Dream acts as the main hub of the game, a safe haven for players to upgrade their characters and weapons, level up, purchase items, and access any area or chalice dungeon in the game. In lore, this was created by Gurman and the Moon Presence in order to have a reliable way of making sure they had hunters on hand to kill beasts. Music box on Gascoigne. There's a side quest in the game involving Gascoigne's daughter, and she'll give you a music box that'll play Murgo's lullaby, causing Father Gascoigne to stop fighting and grasp his head in pain. This normally snaps him out of his beast-killing frenzy, but by the time you meet him it's far too late and it only stuns him. If you use it more than 3 times he'll instantly turn into his wolf form. The Night Phase after Gascoigne, and Pale Blood Moon after Rom. So Bloodborne has a progression mechanic called Moon Cycles. As you progress in the game and kill mandatory bosses, the time of day will progress. Killing Father Gascoigne will turn it from evening to sunset, and killing Rom will activate the Pale Blood Moon, letting out all the spooky Lovecraft shit. 3 third chords. These unlock the true ending of the game by being consumed. I'll read the item description verbatim. A great relic, also known as the cord of the eye. Every infant great one has this precursor to the umbilical cord. Every great one loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate. The third umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. Used to gain insight and, so they say, eyes on the inside, although no one remembers what that truly entails. Make contact. It's the only gesture in the game that actually does anything as far as I can remember. It's the funny clock symbol gesture. Perform it next to the Brain of Mensis and you'll get the Moon Carol rune. Beast Claw. The Beast Claw is one of the weapons you can obtain in Bloodborne. It's notable for being the only trick weapon you can find specifically within the Chalice dungeons, the Ailing Loran Chalice to be exact. The nightmares are stacked on top of each other. Yes, in case you didn't know, all different areas of the nightmare are stacked on top of each other, and not in the big Gazonga mommy milker kind of stacked, if you know what I'm saying. You can see certain areas and other areas up in the sky or deep below. The guy in Ludwig's arena. I thought he died in the cutscene, but he's present crawling around throughout the fight, and if you play very carefully, he can actually live throughout the whole battle. He doesn't do anything though. Yosefka is an imposter. So initially Yosefka will not let anyone inside her clinic at the risk of contaminating her current patients, but pretty soon after she encourages you to bring people to her. This is because the Yosefka we know has been killed by a member of the church, and she's being impersonated in order to collect more people to experiment on, the real Yosefka already being turned into a celestial being. Lesser Amygdala. So these are the fellas that aren't specifically the boss that you fight. Once the Pale Blood Moon is out, you can see all of them around Yharnam. Some will try and attack you, but most are pretty passive. And now we're getting on to Layer 2, and the first entry of Layer 2 is Berserk influences. So like the Souls games before them, Bloodborne is influenced greatly by the manga series Berserk, created by the late Kentaro Miura. Some examples include the Hunter's Mark and the Brand of Sacrifice looking quite similar, the Watchdog of the Old Lords looking similar to the Beast of Darkness, and the Celestial Child looking pretty much exactly like the Demon Child, to name a few. Lovecraft. Bit of a simple one, but the game has taken a ton of inspiration from Lovecraftian stories, the most obvious one probably being the Fishing Hamlet and the Shadow over Innsmouth. The abandoned workshop. What the hunter's dream is inspired by, this was the original workshop Gurman used before he made contact with the moon presence, along with the original doll that was given life in the dream. True ending. This was touched on a little before in the third umbilical cord entry, but Bloodborne has 3 endings: accepting Gurman's offer and returning to the waking world, not accepting his offer and taking his place in the dream, or defeating the moon presence and becoming a grey one. Old loading screen. In the most recent versions of Bloodborne, loading screens have item or costume sets with their description shown for the player to read, but in the initial release it was literally just the logo. Bit boring, innit? The Winter Lantern is made up of messengers. It's hard to tell considering you want to be as far away from these fuckers as humanly possible, but they seem to be partly made from messengers' remains. What this means, I have no idea. Could they be fully matured messengers? Who knows? The Nightmare Crawlers' bodies. The larger crawlers seem to have either dead messengers that they've eaten on the outside of their stomachs, or the bottom of their bodies are made up of messengers, making them similar to the Winter Lanterns. Both are only in the nightmare areas, and both apparently bully poor messengers in their spare time. 60 insight. Having this amount of insight or above will make the crying of Murgo much clearer and will be heard in more areas in the game until you reach him and the wet nurse. Queen Yharnam. Murgo's mother and the, well, Queen of Yharnam. You come across her at various points in the game, although she'll never be hostile as the player is ultimately helping her put her baby to rest. That is until the end of the Chalice dungeon and Corpse Bride looking ass over here decides that she wants to throw hands. Jura knows the doll. Jura was previously a hunter in the dream, with a few voice lines confirming his knowledge of the doll and the dream. Dark Souls 1 DLC. It's now confirmed that Bloodborne was being worked on around the same time that the Artorias of the Abyss DLC was being made, and I personally think that's why Chester was designed the way that he is, and that he's just probably from Yharnam anyway. The Bow and Ash set. The armour of the Keeper of the Old Lords boss. It can be purchased after beating it by the player, and the set talks about them previously committing a great sin, which I'll read the description of now. The long, pointed hat is a symbol of the Old Keepers and is considered evidence of their companionship, forged in a certain sin. It's never directly stated what the sin is, but the general consensus seems to be that they tried to destroy the gods, and as punishment they were made into servants of those that they tried to kill. Uncanny weapons. These to this day are really weird and I don't fully understand them even after doing research on them, but to put it very simply, these are versions of trick weapons that can only equip certain blood gems, always having 2 radical slots. The church caused the Old Yharnam Scourge. Old Yharnam was abandoned and set on fire as the beast population was too out of control for the church to handle. Little did the townspeople know that this was entirely the church's doing, as they were using the citizens as guinea pigs to see the effects of the old blood. And that is the final entry on Layer 2, and we're now going to be heading into Layer 3. Project Beast. This was Bloodborne's working title and what the public knew the game as in the initial announcement. It got its official name reveal in 2014. Key to the Upper Cathedral. It's less the key or where it unlocks, but where you find this item, which makes it more interesting. It can be found on a corpse tied to a chair in the Unseen Village, implying that there could have been a rift between the choir and the Mensa scholars. Maybe. The Hamlet Incident. The cause of like 90% of the cosmic mishaps in Bloodborne, Willem got wind of a small village that worshipped a great one, and in an attempt to collect eyes on the inside, Cos and the inhabitants were brutally massacred, being the main motivation for Maria to lose faith in the healing church. Hypogean jail. Oh, fuck this name again. Underground jail. That's what it means. That's what I'm calling it. This is more or less the testing grounds for the Mensa scholars, evidenced by the sheer amount of corpses litter around and all of the amygdalas vibing. The importance of Quicksilver. Aside from being incredibly useful from a gameplay perspective, you need them to parry after all. There's not a widely spoken about aspect of them from a lore aspect which comes from a real world source. Quicksilver is made of mercury, and a symptom of mercury poisoning are things such as paranoia or anxiety, the madness and nightmares being partly made up of mercury taking its real world dangers to their most extreme paranormal form. Castle Canehurst. Home to many Canehurst nobles before most of them were slaughtered by the Healing Church. Like with the fishing hamlet, it can be assumed that the main reason for this is them feeling threatened by a source of power that doesn't come directly from them. Great Ones versus Kin. As sick as this would be, the entry is not about Amygdala and the Celestial Emissary having a boxing match. I would love that, but that's not what this is about. It's the distinction between them. Great Ones are, for lack of a better term, natural cosmic entities, whereas Kin are made by human experimentation. Hail the Nightmare. So this is a song that can be heard faintly in the Unseen Village. It's sung in Latin, and the lyrics are kind of rough to make out. And like I say, they're in Latin, and I can't speak Latin. I've seen a few different translations, so I'll be using this one I found on Reddit. It's kind of a rough translation from what I saw in the post, but it's the most coherent I could find, I think anyway, that I could find. So I'm going to read it now verbatim. We are cursed. Give to us the blessed infection of the cursed beast. We are cursed. Father, give to us the blessed infection of the silver water. In the dark, in the mother's blood, redemption is seen. Stirring, stirring, and she weeps salt. Farewell, farewell to the blessed infection in the dark waters. We are cursed by the silver water and the blessed infection, and the pale blood, the blood, the blood. Madman's Knowledge. So this is mainly for the icon of the menu, the implication being some sort of slug is crawling into the hunter's head, causing more insight. And as a side note, it really reminds me a lot of how the Magatama is used in Shin Megami Tensei Nocturne, if you've ever played that game, especially when Lucifer first gives the Demi-Fiend the Magatama in the initial cutscene. The Day 1 patch. So as far as I know, this is to do with the change to the umbilical cord description. If you look at it now, the origins are really vague. I did read it before, and yeah, the origins, I think it's safe to say, are quite vague. However, in the original release, like the 1.0 version, it says that it's specifically from Canehurst, which I think is an interesting little retcon. And that was the final entry of Tier 3, so we're now going to be in Layer 4 with Lady Maria's Rakuyo. So this ties into the fishing hamlet incident in the previous layer. So as mentioned, this was the impetus for Maria to lose faith in the church. She was so disgusted with herself that she threw her main weapon into a well and vowed to spend the remainder of her life atoning for the sins committed on that day. Maria's death. Another Maria entry. Shadow the Hedgehog will be molting at this one. So in the game you come across Maria's corpse before she springs back to life. This entry could either be referencing that she likely ended her own life out of guilt sometime after the fishing hamlet incident, or that the player was originally able to speak with her before the boss fight as an NPC before she was killed by Simon. The host of the Hunter's Nightmare. It's established that all Nightmare realms need a host. Gehrman was the host of the Hunter's Dream, and Mikolash for the Nightmare Frontier and Mensis. So who, or what, hosts the Hunter's Nightmare realm that the DLC takes place in? I've seen a lot of theories that it's a combination of Lawrence, Ludwig and Maria, but I personally think it's the spirit of Koz's child that hosts it. Rom's leg sockets. So Rom's legs are absolutely tiny, and there's a lot of just holes across all of its body. It's believed that Rom was crippled, so it had no choice but to remain in the lake in order to cover the secrets of the nightmare. Hemwick and Bone Marrow Ash. This one's quite self-explanatory. Hemwick is mainly where the item comes from in the world. Who wrote Seek Pale Blood? While the game does say that it's specifically a handwritten note, so I think it's safe to assume that either the Blood Minister at the start of the game wrote it, or, more than likely, it was the player character. The Nightmare Frontier is Loran. So the land of Loran is a destroyed area that's mentioned throughout Bloodborne. It parallels the story that's ongoing in Yharnam, a land which initially prospered thanks to its use of the blood, but was overrun with the beast outbreak from overuse. The closest thing to a land of sand that we see in-game is the Nightmare Frontier. It's a vaguely desert-y area, so it can be assumed that this is the Nightmare version of Loran. The main plot and the Mensis ritual. So this entry is basically explaining that your hunt was initially just meant to start off as like any other beast hunt, but you pretty much trip and fall into the doings of the Mensa scholars since they had their ritual on the day that you just happened to start your hunt. Flora of the Moon. So this is a prayer that the doll can rarely say, just wishing for the hunter to be protected and come back safe. And I'm like 99.9% sure that Flora is just another name for the moon presence. The Labyrinth Mole. This is another simple one. This is just an extremely rare enemy that can only be found within the Chalice dungeons. Chalice illusory walls. Unlike in the other FromSoft titles, there are no illusionary walls in the main areas of Bloodborne. They only exist within the Chalice dungeons and are usually just there to give you extra goodies or secret vendors. And that is the last entry of Layer 4, and we're going to be heading into Layer 5. The doll's origin. So after the death of Maria, Gehrman was grief-stricken, making a doll in her image which was given life in the dream. However, as she acted nothing like Maria personality-wise, he most likely became disinterested in her. The Fishing Hamlet Survivor. So I think this entry is referring to the first villager you come across when first accessing the hamlet. It usually speaks of Bergenworth being blood-crazed fiends and the wrath of Koz's curse. However, if you have the Milkweed rune equipped, its dialogue changes as follows. Curse here, curse there. A curse for he and she, why care? A bottomless curse, a bottomless sea. Source of all greatness, all things that be. Listen for the baneful chants, weep with them as one in trance, and weep with us, oh weep with us. And he can also say, listen for the baneful chants, a call to the bloodless wherever they may be, a call to the bloodless wherever they be. Fix your ears to hear our call. Cut content. Like most FromSoft games, and well, games in general, Bloodborne has a fuck ton of cut content. To listen to someone much more qualified go into specifics, I would personally highly recommend checking out Lance Mcdonald's channel if you're interested in that sort of thing. Patches the Spider. Patches returns from Demon's Souls and Dark Souls 1, and like last time, badly pretends to be your friend before fucking you over. This time for religious reasons, to appease his new god, Amygdala. Although this newfound faith quickly flies out the window when confronting him. Although he can rarely appear as a merchant in the Chalice dungeon, so that's a little fun fact. Hail the Nightmare Beta. So I think this is talking about there being a previous version of Hail the Nightmare, and it was going to be Amygdala's theme. Although from what I found on Lance Mcdonald's channel, this was in the alpha version and not the beta. I personally prefer the final version, but this one is still creepy in its own way. Ariana's origins. Ariana is the prostitute you can take back to the chapel, and it's possible she might originally be from Cainhurst, evidenced by her dress description and her blood, which alludes to her blood being similar to one that is forbidden, further linking her to that region. The Shadows of Yharnam. It's stated in-game, but the original purpose of the Snakefucker trio was to serve and protect Queen Yharnam, and presumably baby Murgo as well. Yharnam was built by the Thumerians. Yep, so before modern-day humans populated Yharnam, it was built and used by a race of beings called the Thumerians, which is the race that Queen Yharnam belongs to. Japanese script differences. Like with the cut content entry, this is a massively broad topic that I'm not too well educated enough to cover, so instead I'd highly recommend checking out the YouTube channel Last Protagonist. They do amazing work breaking down the differences between the scripts, and I'll link both Lance's and this channel in the description as well. Rom is a she. Yep, this was directly confirmed in an interview by Miyazaki. And now I'm looking. That Russie finna make me act up. No! Sekiro tease. So it's believed, similar to Chester and Dark Souls 1's DLC, Yamamura, introduced in the Old Hunters DLC, is a small taste of what they were working on in Sekiro, as he's explicitly stated to be a samurai from the East, obviously, like in Sekiro. Developer chalices. Through the chalice glyph sharing feature in Bloodborne, you can access test areas made by the devs of the game, which has a bunch of unused enemies that are featured there. Cainhurst statues missing limbs. So this seems to have to do with the beast scourge reaching Cainhurst and how they deal with it, as in game it states that people believe that beasthood can creep up through the leg, resulting in amputation. Amygdala's name. The creature that gets its name from the part of the brain that processes fearful, threatening, and dangerous stimuli. What this has to do with the enemy, I have no clue. I mean, it's scary, so I guess that's the link between them. Logarius is a Thumerian. Possibly. I mean, he does share a lot of design similarities to some of the Pthumerian Chalice dungeon bosses, in my opinion, but that could be with him acting as a seal for so long, giving him a more corpse-like appearance. I'm not sure, honestly. That was the final entry of Layer 5, and now we'll be getting to Layer 6 on this iceberg, being the Brain of Mensis. One of the most mysterious things in Bloodborne. There's a ton of ideas on where exactly it came from and its intentions. One of it is that it came from the collective experiments from the Mensa scholars, but I personally believe it's a natural but completely harmless Great One that somehow got captured by them, and is wanting to be put out of its misery by the time the player finds it, since the living string description says it's rotten, so it doesn't really seem like it's being looked after at all. Ligarius versus the Vile Bloods. I wasn't really able to find much on this, but my personal theory is that Ligarius just bought into the church's rhetoric about the Vile Bloods being evil, and he manned a group to destroy them and took the crown to prevent more from being made. The Ring of Betrothal. The item description gives a really interesting take on how marriage worked in the Pthumerian era, basically just being a contract for a nominated betrothed to bear a Great One's child. Vicar Amelia's face. Despite seeing her human form in the cutscene, you never get to see what her face looks like up close. Based on her hair, you might assume she's a young woman, maybe in her 20s or 30s. This is what she looks like. Yeah, I think she's seen better days, to be honest. Lawrence's true face. Like Amelia, we never see Lawrence's true human form in-game. However, as shown by a video by Lance Mcdonald, we can see the model that was used in the cutscene. Unlike Amelia though, it's not unique and they just use Mikolash's model. The choir's orphanage was used to make Great Ones. I can't remember if this was ever directly stated in-game, but it's heavily implied through environmental storytelling. In the upper cathedral ward, infant creatures are just littered all over the floor, and it can be assumed that absolutely no one was safe from the church's horrific experimentation, not even the orphans that the church would take in. Archibald is Paul. This is a theory that the character that is mentioned in lore but never met in game turns into the boss Dark Beast Paul, as Paul drops the Spark Hunter badge, the implication being that his obsession with electricity turned him into a beast that uses that element. As a little bonus to this entry, Archibald actually was originally going to be an NPC you could interact with, and he had his own quest line, but this was cut. Warp chairs. Before lamps were implemented into the game, the original intention was that chairs were going to act as checkpoints in the way to access the Hunter's dream. Paul's escape. This theory states that when Dark Beast Paul was human, he was locked in the jail, and either during or just after his transformation, he escaped by knocking down the wall that led to his boss arena, explaining the tunnel. Giants are controlled by bells. All giants in church-heavy areas all have bells around their necks, whereas giants you come across without bells around their necks are more than likely either been freed or just acting on their own. Perhaps maybe giants in general are just extremely sensitive to sound, and thus the church has used the bells in order to make them do their bidding. The Wet Nurse's true form. So this is my own theory. I did mention it in the Bloodborne analysis video, but I want to include it here as well, because I like it a lot. So my personal theory is the reason Murgo takes on the appearance that it does, that it's just a cloak and some blades, is that its power is just so immense, or Murgo's amplifying it so immensely, that even if the player had the maximum amount of insight that a human can have, just a human being cannot process what Murgo's wetness really looks like in like its true form. So my theory is that it does actually have a physical form, just the human body is completely incapable of being able to comprehend what it is, so it just shows as an empty cloak. And that is the last entry of Layer 6, and we're now going to be going into Layer 7, the second last layer of this iceberg. What is pale blood? So apparently Miyazaki has stated there are two interpretations on what pale blood could be. One is the colour of the sky after the player's defeat of Rom and the Mensa's secret ritual is revealed. The sky there is a very pale blue, like a body drained of blood. Before the ritual is revealed, when the player is kidnapped and goes to Yahar Ghul, they don't know what it could mean yet. Then, after the ritual, they could look at it again and it'll dawn on them. This leads to the interpretation that Seek Pale Blood refers to uncovering the ritual and putting a stop to it. Or 2, the monster that comes from the moon under certain conditions, the moon presence being the pale blood in question. Rom's incident. I'm not 100% sure what this is referring to, but I believe this is talking about Rom's ascension from a human into a Great One, hinted at in one of Mikolash's ramblings when you fight him. Bergenworth and human transcendence. This entry is referring to that the Bergenworth building and organisation was entirely dedicated to studying Great Ones, because that is where Great Ones were originally studied, and they used that information in order to try and attain the next step in human evolution. Lawrence's betrayal. I'm not sure why this is so deep down in the iceberg, since this is explicitly stated in a cutscene in the game. Willem felt betrayed by Lawrence as their ideologies on how to use the Old Blood differed, resulting in Lawrence founding the Healing Church. Or, another interpretation could be that this entry is talking about how Gehrman is trapped in the Hunter's dream, and he's not able to leave until Lawrence returns. But Lawrence is dead, so he's never coming back, thus betraying Gehrman. The Winter Lanterns are copies of the doll. The body under all of their gore and tendrils have the exact same clothing as the doll. I don't think there's any real lore reason for this, and it's probably more so just a clever reuse of assets. Cos and Cosm are separate entities. No, I don't think they actually are. I think it's just a slightly different way of saying its name. I guess if you really want to try and give them separate forms, maybe Cos is the actual entity that died and Cosm is the orphan. And obviously the orphan didn't really get a chance to have a true name because it died as a baby. But that's the only other theory that I could think of as to Cos and Cosm being separate entities. But like I say, I personally really don't think they are. I think they're just different ways of saying the name. Odin's true form. Simply put, there isn't one. It's specifically referred to as a completely formless Great One, having managed to ascend to a higher plane of existence, even further than that of the other Great Ones. The closest it could have to a form is the design of the formless Odin rune, maybe, but I don't personally believe that that's actually meant to convey what Odin would look like. The choir kidnapped Ebriatus. This is a theory on why specifically she was left behind by the other Great Ones. Not because she was abandoned by them, but that the choir had managed to keep her rooted to the waking world in order to keep a steady flow of blood. Personally, I don't agree with this theory and believe that Ebriatus and the choir simply just have a common goal of contacting other Great Ones. How to pick up fair maidens. This is more important than ever with the release of Elden Ring. You don't want to be caught maidenless in this economy. This is the cover of a book you can find in the Hunter's Dream. I mean, with Maria being dead, my man Gehrman's probably pretty lonely. Listen, man, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. No judgment here. Yosefka was originally Murgo's wet nurse, so this is a bit of a weird one. In Old Cut content, Yosefka was going to be a much older woman, and with how she looks like when she's hunched over, she looks a little bit similar to what Murgo's wet nurse might have looked like as a human, so maybe there was some connection previously. Wandering bosses. In Deep Chalice dungeons, you have a rare chance of bosses acting as normal enemies. They act pretty much the same as their boss counterparts, moveset wise, they just have less health. The Clock Tower Hunter Badge. This was a cut item that was going to be used in the old Hunters DLC. It's safe to assume that it would have acted like the other badges in the game and would allow you to buy more items from the messengers. Mad Ones in Yharnam. So this is referencing a cut feature that if insight was high enough, Mad Ones would appear all over Yharnam, but this idea was scrapped due to being too difficult to handle in large numbers. The choir wants to stop the Mensis ritual. So this is something that's touched on a little bit in game, but it's something you really have to sort of dig deep for, in my opinion. So to put it very briefly, the choir think that the Eldritch goings-on must not be revealed under any circumstances, whereas the Mensa scholars are dedicated to bringing down the Blood Moon, which is why you can sometimes see one or two members of one faction in an area that's mainly controlled by the other in-game. Canehurst cut content. So the Cliff Notes version was going to be a lot more explorable content in Canehurst, with potentially more bosses and a different purpose for allying with Annalise. The Cry of the Orphan. It's a pitched-down version of Gehrman's crying that you can hear very rarely when he's resting in the Hunter's Dream. This to me feels way too specific just to be like a coincidence or a reuse of assets. So perhaps maybe the orphan is mimicking what he heard, and one of the only things he can remember hearing is German either crying in grief after what he did in the hamlet or over losing Maria. The Hunter's Nightmare and Buddhist Hell. I think this has to do with the area around Ludwig's boss arena and the insect enemies that you can find leading up to it, as it apparently depicts similar scenarios of what people who have sinned will be treated to in the afterlife according to Buddhist beliefs, but that's not nearly my area of expertise, so I'm going to leave it at that. All 2,300 dungeons explored. So this is the total amount of dungeons that can be generated in the Chalice dungeons, and a very dedicated group of fans called the Tomb Prospectors have gone through and mapped out every single possible map that can be generated in the game, so props to them. And that was the end of level 7, and now we're in layer 8, the deepest and final layer of this iceberg. The Blood Minister. You might raise an eyebrow at this one, but you have encountered this character before. He's the old man in the intro cutscene who speaks about pale blood. In the cut content, it was going to be revealed that he's a character named Father Norbert, who some people believe to be the human form of the cleric beast before transforming. Bergenworth Secret Door. There's a door at the bottom of the Bergenworth building that looks like it can be opened. It can't. The moon presence prevents great ones from birthing. I've looked and I cannot find a theory or anything along the lines of this that supports this. Great ones can have children, just that them dying is very common. Perhaps the moon presence allowed Murgo to be born, not thinking that it's a threat, and after everything that happened, it then stopped the other great ones having children, so nothing else can pose a threat like Murgo did, but that is a very far reach on my part. The source of the Scourge of Beasts. It's a combination of the overuse of the old healing blood and the influence of the red moon, which greatly accelerates the growth of the beast within those infected. You are a great one. Again, I'm not sure why this is in the final layer, but if you eat the umbilical cords and defeat the moon presence, you become a great one, and I would assume the doll would take care of you until you're matured and able to steer humanity in a different and hopefully more positive direction. It was all a dream. No. No, it wasn't. Shut up. Demon Soul sequel. In the earliest drafts of the game, probably before it being known as Bloodborne and still Project Beast, I believe it was being made with the idea of it being a continuation of the Demon Souls world, or that it was going to be explicitly connected to Boletaria in some way, what with the use of Umbasa in the network test. And I believe it was going to be revealed that the Chalice dungeons were actually Boletaria, and it was just built, and Yana was built over Boletaria, which, off script, would have been such a fucking cool reveal. I kind of wish that's what they went with, but I'm also happy with Bloodborne being its own world. But anyway, this idea was scrapped quite quickly, as Sony stated that they wanted a brand new IP for the PS4, and Miyazaki has stated that the Dark Souls games, Demon Souls, Bloodborne, Sekiro, and now Elden Ring are all on their own separate continuities, but it's still a fun little thing to try and connect them in headcanon. Odin metaphor for Minamata disease. This is sort of linked to the entry way earlier about Quicksilver, so with the Formless Odin rune, you have access to more Quicksilver, i.e. Mercury, and Minamata disease is in reference to a mercury poisoning incident that happened in Japan, so some people believe that this is a metaphor for that incident. Personally, I think it's just a coincidence, but it's something kind of interesting to think about, I suppose. Castle Archive NPC. So this is basically speaking about an enemy NPC hunter that was cut from the game, but you are actually able to view in an old promotional image. The Lake of Mud. This was actually referenced in cut dialogue. This was going to be the place the player fights the moon presence. The area in this earlier version of the boss can be accessed by players via the Chalice dungeon glyphs, and it actually reminds me quite a lot of the beach where you fight the Orphan of Cause, and the official art with the hunter stood in the water with a baby carriage makes me think the original plan was to have a sort of hybrid of the game's ending and the DLC's ending. Maybe for whatever reason we had to take Murgo to the lake to put him to rest, with the moon presence being our final obstacle. There's no evidence to support that last part, but I thought it was just something fun to think about. And now for our final entry. Copy of Bloodborne personalized 60 FPS version. Please upgrade it for PS5 or make a remaster or PC port, please. Nah, 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 nah. I'm just messing. I'm just joshing. I'm not leaving it on a joke ending this time. I'm actually going to discuss the original plan for Bloodborne's plot. You were supposed to be friends with Lawrence. Now, bear in mind, this version of Lawrence and presumably all of the characters who shared the same names would not be the same characters they are today, if that makes sense. So like I say, you and Lawrence were friends, were buddies. However, your character ended up in a coma, and Lawrence leaving in search of a cure named Sage Blood. And with the warping chairs, the player would be able to enter a place called the Dream Refuge, so in other words, the Hunter's Dream. And the doll would explain that it's a safe haven for those who are suffering from diseases. As well as this, Mikolash would have had a much more prominent role in the story and would have been like a friendly character at first who then descends into madness, and Willem would be some alternative form of his. And that's the end of the video. So this took quite a long time to make and a lot of research, and like I've said a couple times, I'll be linking all my sources in the description. So if you guys like the video, I would really appreciate you doing all the YouTube things, the likes, the comments, the subscribing, kick the bell. Yeah. Um, so that would be great. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.